So welcome everybody to our computer vision workshop. So this is presented by UTMIST. And so our first session will be about 2D image understanding. And my name is Chloe. So a little bit about me. I'm currently a fourth-year computer science and statistics student at U of T. I'm from the Mississauga campus. And I previously worked as a data scientist intern at Mana International. So it's like one of the biggest automotive parts company, essentially. And so what I do there is that I help develop fine-tuning and training their foundation model for detecting defect in automotive parts. So if you're in like an assembly line, before you put all the parts together, you want to make sure that every part doesn't have any scratch, all the sides are correct. Even if it's off by like a millimeter, that is not acceptable by industrial standards. And so essentially I help develop detection and segmentation pipelines to and then get deployed in the factory. And so it will help to do like really high quality control. So you don't want to have like 8 people staring at it at the same time. And so that's pretty much what I do. Before that, I was also a research assistant at University Health Network, where I worked on biomedical imaging for detecting diabetic foot ulcers and like localizing and categorizing it based on how severity it is. It sounds kind of cool, but like if you look up like my paper, that it's just like a bunch of feet, so it's just like really mid. So if you want to look at that, you can. But now I'm onto a bit more cooler stuff. I'm currently doing 3D part segmentation for rare polygon shapes at TISL, which is one of the lab that I just showed, or that Jessica just showed. So I'm kind of advancing more into 3D vision now, which you guys can also learn about by, I think, the third session of the workshop. We'll have another speaker here to speak a bit about 3D vision. And so, yeah, so overall, my research interest is in 2D and 3D vision. And in a previous life, I was also working a bit on genomics. And so how many of you guys are interested in like 2D vision only? Or are you guys more also into like 2D and 3D and 4D videos and like higher shapes as well? I mean, if you guys are still like not sure about it, it's okay. That's what we're here for. Okay, so today we'll be going over some of the most basic computer vision tasks. We will be going, so there are essentially 4 basic tasks. The easiest one is like the really simple, like it is a dog or a cat kind of thing, right? So it's just classification, where you're given one image and then the model will try to predict, just spit out like one label per image. So it's the simplest one. Let's try this. Okay, nice. And then the second one is semantic segmentation, which is essentially you predict a class label for each and every little pixel in an image. The third one is object detection, which is it requires a higher level of understanding where, it's not just predicting and assigning each of these labels here, but it's also trying to localize and produce bounding boxes for each of these objects. And lastly, for instance segmentation, it's like the highest level of it, where we aim to not only predicting one, like not just doing the bounding box, but also detecting and producing a pixel level mask for each of these instances. So you can see here, as we progress it along, we'll be kind of discovering how different techniques are used to progressively allow models to learn more spatial information. So before we go into like the techniques in here, I want to kind of like do a bit more of like motivation as to why we care about these things in the first place. If we as humans can see it, right, why do we need computers to do it for us? Well, a really simple example is for autonomous vehicles. So we have Tesla and Waymo, and in Toronto here we have Waabi as well, which is a self-driving truck companies. And all these companies operate based on the idea that they have a really, really strong obstacle detection and object detection in real time, so that it can inform the agents to be able to like maneuver on the road and avoid collision. The second one is satellite imaging and urban planning for disaster management. So a lot of these are sort of more like Google Earth, right? So how do we have the Google Maps that we have right now? We essentially, they would need to be able to scan and identify really like a large amount of images. And from here, not just to help with navigating on Google Maps, but also to help with disaster planning, predicting how it will grow in like the next certain amount of time. And lastly, like I said before, so this is what I worked on. So industrial inspection and quality control. We want to reduce the dependence on humans, so it reduce the amount of labor needed. Another like slightly tangent to this is also like CCTV cameras, right, for safety, and a little bit of like China CCP thing, but we don't know about that. And then another thing is, again, medical imaging, right? And so depends on the use cases. It can goes from just object detection or like higher level image segmentation or instant segmentation. So, okay. So for these image classification, they're very simple. Assume we have a given set of labels beforehand, dogs, cats, car, plane. We give it an image, and we will hope that the model can learn enough spatial information from here to say that, oh, that is a cat. And so, but then again, how does the model see an image, right? So we know for a fact that these images, especially in color images, it is represented as RGB pixels. So what we have here is that like in order for us to see like a color image here, then what is being represented in numbers are 3 layers. So for example, the first layer is only pixels that represent the location of green, the next is red, and the last one is blue. All of these are stacked together into like a stack of 3, and then these are represented as color images. And so I have a quick math question for you guys. So given that we have an image of width 320 and height 320, essentially I want to ask how big is this image, right? Let's see what we have here. Okay. How big would like the area of this be?
Around 125K.
Sorry?
Around 125K.
325.
No, around 125,000.
How do you get to that number?
I mean, 35 times 35 is like,
You mean 320?
no, like 35 times 35 is like 125, 1,250.
Wait, no, sorry, let me just like, so 35 times 30.
Yeah, that's 1,250.
Okay.
And then that's 1
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like we have like a relatively straightforward way to go about it, right? Like if we just do 320 times 320, right? And then we'll have the kind of the area of like just one layer of things, right? Right. And but then we have 3 of them. So what? So we have 3 of these stacked together. How big would all 3 of these be?
Like
Yeah.
2.5. If you count it in like this, 320 equals 320 times 3 is 8.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it. But like we don't necessarily need to care about the bits for now. I mean, like I kind of choose like a bad photos for this. But if we don't care about the bits for now, if we just do all of this and then times 3, then we will have like 3,000, 300,000, 7,200 pixels. And then if you want to calculate the bits, then sure, you'll take this and then you times it with like 34, I think. But yeah, and so just to give like an example of how this is represented in numbers. And so imagine that the like our model, whichever models we wanted to do, will have to look and learn from each one of the pixels of like 300, more than 300,000 for a relatively small images to make a decision as to what label we want to classify this image to be. And like 320 by 320 is like a really, really small, like really blurry photo of like, if you see those like 0 to 9 digits of like the MNIST data set, then like it's kind of like that. It's really small. Like the photos that we often see, like we use today, are like much higher quality of like that is like a few megabytes. Then it would be will have a dimension of like usually more than 1,000 each side. Okay, so let's see. So so we'll go over the kind of like a brief overview of like a convolutional neural network, but we'll revisit this many times. But overall, when we're given an input, and then we will project these images into the convolution neural network. And then as you can see here, like as is trying to learn from like the many pixels that we have here, it'll try to not learn like too many things. It'll try to reduce the dimension through a lot of the pooling layers. So as we go through each of the pooling layers, the amount of information that we retain reduces. And then by the time it gets to kind of like the end, which is usually reduced to probably by like 32 by 32 vector, and then we'll flatten it and use a softmax activation function to learn the distribution of the features here, and then it will output usually it's called a logit, which is probability of like how much it's each of the labels are likely to be assigned to the image, and then we'll select the highest one. And so that is so overall it's like a simple image classification. But for semantic segmentation, then we want to classify not just the overall image, but we want to classify each and every pixel here. So say like we want to classify that like these pixels over here are of class guy, and like these one in particular here are like cat, for instance. And so in order to do this, in our input, when we're training a model, then we need, for each of the input image, we want to pair it with a ground truth mask with semantic category. And then we hope that during testing time, when given a new image, it'll be able to produce the same mask with the same level of definition. And so given that we have so many things to process, right? And so one technique that people explored before is the sliding window approach, which is to classify each pixel using a local image patch. So for each of these, they'll try to take out like a little square here, and then we'll run a classifier on each of these little patches, and then we'll assign a predicted label to each of the center pixel. So this is like, let's see if I can run this. Oh, okay, I can. So this is how it would look like. So for example, so this example, by the way, is doing wrinkle detection on this like literature, which is also kind of like similar to what I worked on. So imagine like if you have like a Ford or like a Ferrari or like a Lamborghini, like a really spoiled rich kid of some like billionaire is not gonna want any of these little wrinkles, right? And so we want to be able to detect all of these, and then you'll have a robotic arm comes in and then iron out all of these. Or if it's too bad, it just reject it altogether. So that is the level of detection that we want to be able to find with that level of accuracy. So as we go through all of these, and it's detecting the wrinkles in each of these. I'm going to put it again. Okay, there you go. In each of these squares. So, okay. So I have a question for you guys. So what is something that's like concerning about the squares? Are these squares like perfectly next to each other, or are these like a little too crowded? Yeah. So so this is also concerning because it would be very inefficient, right? Because like we would need to run a classifier through each of these little squares. And if these squares are overlapping, sure, the model will be able to detect it a bit better, but then it's inefficient. Each of these overlapping means unnecessary computation, right? Okay, so. Okay, yeah. Okay, so so sliding windows approach is like it used to be like a popular approach in like the 2010s, but then we move on to better techniques. So what if we do a convolutional neural network on this, right? And so we can so this is like an image from before where we have the CNN on the entire image, and then we do segmentation on top. But then, so if we recall, like our expected output is not like, you know, 3 numbers, right? We want the output to be an entire mask of the same size as the input. So so we can't reduce the dimension of the layers as we learn, but we still want to somehow extract only the important information. So how do we fix this? So this is how we come to the idea of a fully convolutional network. So this looks kind of scary, but I'll just kind of go through this each part of it. So given the input here, as we go through each of the layer of convolutional layers, so the size are still being reduced. So we can go like, as we go, we usually reduce by half until we get to like the lowest dimension possible, which is like maybe like, for example, here, it's like divide by 4, but in some cases, if it's like a really big image, we might divide it to like by 16 or 48. And so it is downsampling, right? So as we're going down, we're reducing the amount that we are processing. But then once we're going back up again, this part is called upsampling, which is it will try to, so after we get to this and then we assigned our predictions of it, and we will try to upsampling it again, and then we'll connect it to using skip connection. I'll go here. Yeah. So in the downsampling phase, we increase the field of view, and then we lose the unnecessary spatial information. We only keep the important ones. So imagine like a really simple example would be like if we have a patch of like size 16 and we want to reduce it to size 8, but keep the relative information, we might want to only keep the maximum values, for example, right? So for example, if we have really some simple example where this is 4 by 4. And then we want to reduce it to, like say just like one number, right? We can, if we use, let's say, if we use a mass function, then we'll say, oh, I just need to care about x because it is all we care about. So this is great. Times. Depends on your use case. Some other times, if we have something that is more like, if the numbers are a bit different, so we have like 0 and this is 1. Okay. Then sure we can also say 8, but then we might be losing like some of these information here. So another way is we can do we can reduce it to maybe mean of all of these, which is also another way we could encode information. Or we can also do like linear, and there are many other techniques as well, but that is kind of to give you guys an overall idea of like how we are able to kind of reduce the size as we go through these layers. And then once we get down to here, and then we get the all of the encoded information needed to do the prediction, then we want to go back up again, right? So how do we go back up again? After we lose all of these, like say we use max and we press 8, we'll never know that there's 0 and 1 in here. But is it important? Maybe sometimes. And so another one way to do it is to use skip connections. So once we have like these like overall, we still have like when we're encoding it, there's a connection between the encoder and the decoder layer. So this so like say for example, once we got to 8 here, there's still like a connection between these two. So by the encoding it up again, we can still produce add more information so that it's doesn't lose the detail that we need. And so finally, well, okay, so before we go on, so for the task of semantic segmentation, one thing that we were able to achieve is that it gives a really detailed analysis of the entire image structure. So we know down to the really tiny pixels what each of these are. However, it comes to the question of like, did it still not? In some cases, we want to learn even more. For instance, we want to know that like this red blob and this red blob are of the class vehicle, but we want to know that it's two different instances of the same class, right? And so how do we do that? How do we tell that there's two different instances of class vehicles, right? And so this leads to the idea of object detection. So for object detection, it combines the two goals of segmentation and localization. So we want to be able to predict which objects are present. So we have an object of dog and an object of bicycle, for instance. And then we want to know where they are located. And so in terms of the output, we want not a big pixel mask. We only want the bounding box coordinates and the associated class labels. And sometimes the probabilities of like these associated with the probability of the class labels as it is associated with the coordinates. And so as you can see, so just not even going into the techniques, but just in terms of like the expected output, it is faster and simpler. There will be less computational power needed, and it's beneficial when we need like immediate information. So like for instance, again, coming back to the idea of like autonomous vehicles, if we're driving on the road, we want to know if like a pedestrian is passing right in front of you, then you want to know like immediately and avoid them. We don't need to know like down to the pixel where their hair is. We just need to know where their head is and avoid them. Okay, so so I will go over some of the techniques for object detection. So instead of learning each and every pixels here, we only want to approximately find a blob of image regions that are likely to contain the object. And then we will only do segmentation and run like a convolutional layers on there. So how do we find these regions? So you might, if you worked in computer vision, you will have heard about RCNN, which is region proposals using CNN. So the idea is that given an input image, we will we will try to generate region proposals, and then we will only run CNN on each of these regions. And then again, we predict the bounding box and class labels on here. But one of the drawbacks of this is, again, coming back to the idea that there's still too many, right? So what if, like, in this image, our regions of interest is like, if there are like 2,000 regions of interest, each of them is like really small, then that means we still have to run a convolutional neural network 2,000 times for each image. So that still takes a lot of time. So instead of doing that, ideally, we will want to pass this image through a convolutional neural network before cropping them. And then, so after we pass it through here, and then it will learn all of the the features needed. And then from there, we only cropped, oh, sorry. So this is, so by this point, it is no longer an image, but this is just the features as the network have already learned. And then we only cut important regions from here to, and then feed it into linear softmax or linear to get the bounding boxes. And so this will help to greatly reduce redundant computation while still achieving the same level of accuracy. But then the question becomes, how do we know which blob to learn from? How do we know which region to learn from? And so faster RCNN also improved this by introduce the region proposal network. So in order to do this, which is also called RPN. So the RPN will generate region proposals directly from the feature maps. And then it eliminates the need for external proposal algorithm. And so imagine we have an anchor box of fixed size at each point in the feature maps. And then at each of these points, we will predict whether the box that contains this anchor point has an object or not. And so like from the, like during the training data, so the training data will have like an image, and they all have a set of bounding box coordinates and anchor points for the model to learn from, and they will learn to kind of associate that with the pixel information. And then, so it will train both the regional proposal network to be able to propose accurate regions, and then it will also train the CNN afterwards to learn from those proposed regions. Yeah.
What are the anchors? Small.
Yeah. So so like for instance, we want to detect like the cat, right? And so like in this cat here, then it'll try to, like for example, like this is the box that, like, say in the training data, then we have the bounding box coordinates, and then we have like an anchor box here. And so it will learn to like associate these anchor boxes with the features learned from there. And then, so like it will train the RPN to propose the accurate like anchor boxes. Yeah. Yeah. So we need to train both the proposal network, and then we train the classifier network. Yeah. And so this is just to kind of like instead of we train like one model to just like classify each and every pixel, we wanted to kind of do like a bit of like a heavier, like heavy duty first, only like to kind of like make the area here smaller. So like, for example, like we only want the convolutional neural network to only work on this like smaller box instead of like an entire one. So it doesn't need to learn from like the sky region, for instance. So yeah. Okay. And so another techniques, which is the YOLO models. So the YOLO models is really famous, which stand for you only look once, and it's used for real-time object detection. And so the YOLO models are is relatively different from some of the earlier approaches that we went through. So if you recall, the traditional detection method used 2 stages. They need a region proposal, and then you need to classify each of those regions. And so this is accurate, but it's still slow and computationally expensive. And so like again, another theme that you'll see here is the idea that like doing computer vision is really heavy on the GPU that you're working on. And so a lot of the techniques is like I think like in like 2017, we already achieved like 70 to 80% accuracy on the I think it was the like the CFAR data set, which is like it's like 1 billion images. But however, it takes like 2 days, or like I think it reduced to like 2 days to train on the entire thing. And so a lot of the techniques is about how to make it as fast as possible. And so so YOLO does this a little differently by introducing the idea of a single stage detection, where the network predicts the bounding box and classes probability directly from the image in one forward pass. So instead of scanning the image with like sliding windows or generating proposals, the YOLO will immediately divide the image into a grid of cells. And then each of these grid cells is responsible for detecting the objects that have the center lies inside of that cell. And so, so like for instance, after we divide this into like an S by S grid, and each of these grid will try to detect if there's a dog in it, or if there's a bicycle in it, or if there's a car in it. And then after we learn all of these, so that's why like in the middle, you will have like a really crazy looking map like this. But then in the end, we will try to go over each of these boxes and then kind of like sum up and find the one with the highest probability. But so far, what we see is mostly based on CNN. But now I want to kind of talk a little bit about the ETR, which is also solving the object detection question, but using a transformers architecture. And so the idea of a transformer architecture is like it's the most important thing is that it has an encoder decoder part. Okay, so instead of generating candidate boxes and then filtering them later, the ETR learns to output a fixed set of object predictions directly from the model. So so it has overall, we have it's still this one, yeah, it still needs a little bit of like a CNN in the beginning, but then it'll pass it through a transformer encoder decoder network. And then we'll lead it into a set of box predictions, and then it will use bipartite matching loss to in the prediction heads. So the first stage is using a convolutional neural network, typically a ResNet, to extract visual features from the input image. And so it will convert all of these into a feature maps containing all of the spatial information required. And so these feature maps will act as tokens to be passed into this transformers architecture. And so like the reason why you kind of see it's like a little block here is because the idea is that it will always flatten the token vector into just like a sequence of feature vectors. Let's see. Yeah, okay. And then another thing is that so after we got all of the features that it learned from like the pixels, and then it will generate a positional encoding. So positional encoding is essentially the idea of like how are the features, how these features relate to each other in terms of like position. So for instance, so previously transformer was developed based on text, right? And so positional encoding in that context means like, for example, usually you'll have, if you have the word there, then you'll expect E's or R next to it, right? And so that is in terms of words. But in terms of images, then it's a bit more complicated where you'll learn to associate like a lot of the white pixels are like in the same area together, and versus like a lot of the black pixels being next to each other. And then you'll learn that all of like a blob of white pixels are to be next to the black area, for instance. And so we need this positional encoding to feed it into the transformer architecture. And so what happens here is that the encoder will process this sequence of tokens in self-attention layers. So self-attention allows each of these image regions to interact with every other region in the image. And so this helps the model to capture like a global context. So for instance, if given an image of like these two birds here, it will hopefully learn that like a pixels in the head versus like in the tail are to go together, and like it won't. And so if you present it with like another image of the same thing but like a different background, it will still learn to kind of learn the global context of this. And so it helps to understand scenes and relationships between the objects. And then, and so by the time we learn enough of these, we will move this into a prediction head. And so each decoder output, each of these like little box here, is passed into a smaller feed-forward network. And so these network will produce the class probabilities and the bounding box coordinates. And so if we have any of these queries that is not corresponding to any of the object, then it will simply be labeled as a no object class. Yeah. And so in the end, we'll be able to identify not just objects in a class, but also the different, like each instance of a class. And so this, so for vision transformers in general, and like for DETR in particular, if you train it on enough images, you'll be able to learn a lot and have a really strong performance. But however, it still have a slow training convergence. Yeah. Yeah. Wait, sorry. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so. Yeah. Okay. So Hmm. So yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. So, so the decoder, so once it learns from the embeddings here, and then it will try to process each of the I think so. Like each of so we have like a set of object labels beforehand, right? And so it will try to go through each of these object queries, and they will try to associate probabilities of each of these labels to like that features that we learned. And so like each of those have the information, and then the like X, Y, and then height width associated with the area. Yeah. And so some of these, in terms of like how the prediction heads arrive at these predictions, then it has a multitask loss. So it combines like a couple of them. So it'll have the classification loss, which is cross entropy loss over predicted classes. And then we'll have bounding box losses, which is like usually like an L1 for to learn for it to learn to predict the accurate box coordinates, and then a generalized IOU loss to make sure that the overlapping, as in like the predicted bounding box, is overlapping as much with the ground truth box as possible. And so overall, again, for transformers, one of the problem is it's also similar to text-based transformers, is that it needs a lot of data, and it has a really relatively slow training conversions. And so there's still a lot of research in here to improve the performance of this and improve and like lower the amount of data needed to achieve the same level of performance. Okay, let's see. Okay, so yeah, so up to this point, we have discussed about semantic segmentation and then object detection separately. So if we remember before, for semantic segmentation, we classify each and every pixels in here. And then for object detection, we would draw a box around these things. But then now we don't want to draw boxes anymore. We want to be able to divide each of these into its own instance, and we still be able to tell that these instances are under the same class. And so the final stage of this, the final stage of like how well we can push these techniques is instance segmentation, which combines the task that we had before. It not only identifies and locates the object within an image, but it will also try to outline their precise boundaries. And so in order to do this, like models would need to provide a pixel per pixel classification, and they will need to distinguish between the different instances of the same types of object. And so again, so something that you'll see is that like these models are like it build up on one another. And so one way to do instance segmentation is mask or CNN. So so this is based on the faster RCNN. So you recall from before, the faster RCNN, we have a region proposal network, and then we use a convolutional layer on each of these network. And so this model simply adds a segmentation branch. So for each of the detected object region, it will try to also apply a mask on it, which is predict which pixels inside the bounding box belong to like one object. And so one thing is that the mask is usually using a really small size, which is like usually only 28 by 28 resolution. And so that is to reduce the amount of time or the amount of work that we need each of these convolutional network to run on. And so with the techniques that we have so far, these models are doing relatively well. So it can identify objects separated. And then it also does pose detection as well. So like you probably might have seen a lot of these in like hackathon projects where you have like a video and then or like an image. And then as you move around, it can identify and like draws out the pose for each of these. And so the pose here is simply like an anchor point or like a center. And then and so it's faster, right? Because if you only need to predict like 5 points for each of these poses that you're doing here. And so you can kind of see like how some of these techniques before it applies into the models that you see being used in like projects. Okay, so the first part that we've seen so far is overall it's supervised learning. So as in during training, you always give the model one image and then one ground truth mask. It can be either the whole pixel level mask or like really detailed bounding box coordinates or anchor point coordinates, right? But then the question becomes, how do we even get these ground truths in the first place, right? So back in 2010, I think, so like when like this whole thing just started, I think Dr. Feifei leads the research at Stanford University, where they employ like 600 people from the Amazon Mechanical Turks, and which is kind of like, I usually think of it as like the predecessor of like Skill AI right now, where you outsource to people and they would go in and like do this. They would go in and then they would very carefully like outline each of these things for a model to learn from. And imagine like there is one image that and so you assign it to one person, but one person is subjective. And so they do it for 3 annotators, right? So you assign one of these image to 3 annotators. They have they produce their mask and then they average it out into one ground truth, right? And so for like 1 billion images, I think 600 is like still low. I don't remember the exact number, but essentially they employ a lot of people, outsourcing it to people all around the world, just to get enough data to train this model to recognize that this is a chair, right? And so there's a lot of work that goes into it, not to consider the training time that goes into these. And so that motivates the idea of contrastive representation learning, which is a technique for semi-supervised or self-supervised learning. So given just the image, just a lot of images on itself, no labeling, how do we make the model learn just from that? And so the idea is actually like a little bit simple. So so we defined 3 types of samples in our training data. We have the X, which is the original training image. And then we have a positive example, which is that we pick this image and then we apply some form of transformation to it. So for example, we cropped it, rotate, cropped into like different pieces, or apply some sort of like say like a little bit of blurring or apply different coloring to it. And so these are called positive because technically speaking, these are still counted as a cat, right? And then we have a negative sample, which is a sample from a different class. And so we would want to train a model such that it learns to associate all of these positive examples to be very different from this example, right? And so say like a model, it doesn't need to know that this is a cat and this is a dog, but it needs to know that all of these are very different from this, right? And so in a sense, it's like a really high level clustering, right? So and so it doesn't need semantic labels, and then the model will learn all of these differences coming from the data augmentation. And so when we learn that two augmentations of the same image represent the same object, then they form a positive pair. And so we want the model to learn these like green arrows essentially. And it should learn to push these two away as far as possible. And so terms that they use to call these features are called invariant features. Okay. Yeah, and so again, this is just kind of like the math of it. We don't need to, or like you guys don't need to really care so much about these, but essentially it's just to further show the kind of the idea for this. So we use a cosine similarity as the score function to assign score to how close two samples are. And then we use a projection network, G, to project features into a space where we can apply the contrastive learning. And so these are some of like more examples, right? And so from the original, we want the model to learn that even if you crop it, group crop and you flip it, distortion, this is called jittering. And then you can rotate, cut out, apply Gaussian noise. And so when I don't know if you can see it here, but like when you apply Gaussian noise to these, then essentially it will apply like a random noise to each and every pixel in an image. And it's the color, like it won't appear too different, but in terms of like the numerical representation, it might be different, but then the model should still learn that even with the noise added on top of it, it is still the same object. Yeah, and so to advance even further, what if we try to do all of this, but no negative samples, right? Because sure, like, from one image, you can apply, like a million things and you'll have like a million positive samples. But then how do we do it without the dog? Can we just learn that all of these are the same without like needing the dog here to push it away? And so that's why we come to this next techniques, which is dyno or self-distillation with no label. And so for the dyno model, it tries to train two networks. Wait, let's see. Okay, yeah, let me go back. Okay, so so the dyno employed the idea of like a student-teacher network, where both networks will process different augmented views of the same image. And then the goal is for the student network to match the output distribution of the teacher network. And so the key characteristics here is that it's, again, no labels and no explicit negative samples. So the thing is here is that from the original image, we will generate multiple image augmentation, which is our positive examples. And then and in particular, we will have the global crops, which is we have like the large view of the image. And then we will also have the local crops, which is the smaller patches. So like, for example, here, like for instance, we have this, which is like the original, and then we have like the local crops. And then we let a student network to only learn from like the smaller views here. And then we teach the teacher network to learn more, as in like it will let it be exposed to both the global and the local crops. And then we try to train it such that the student network, given that it learns from a smaller views, still be able to match the performance of the teacher network. And so we'll try to match so that the distribution that the student network learned is the same as the teacher network. And then lastly, for Dino V2, there is an improved versions of Dino. And so again, like for these, it's some of the more like higher improvement is that it's trained on larger data set. And then it used a vision transformer backbones to produce higher quality embedding. And then they employ a little bit more of like more complicated, I think, changes to the normalization and loss function to improve training stability. And then we'll have, and then the goal is that they want to have stronger zero-shot features, as in like just given this image, and then it'll just learn to, without any labels and input, it should learn to classify and detect each parts. Yeah, and so that is kind of like the overall of all the techniques currently being used in 2D image understanding. And then next section will be about like generative modeling. So each of these techniques that we learn here is all about classification, or in another word, it's a discriminative model. But then, so next session we'll be looking over generative models, which is given like one like ground truth image, how does a model generate an image that is like similar enough to the original, but like it still have like a certain level of differences to it. And so we'll be going over like diffusion models, and yeah, so it'll be like a different flavor. And so yeah, thank you everybody for coming. So this is my session. Yeah, 2D image understanding. And so if you guys want, I know that like, this is like a lot to take in at the same, like at once, but just a lot of things to go through. Like my goal is to not go too deep into like the math of it, but to kind of go over some of the high level techniques and how they are different, and like the goal that each of these are trying to do. And hopefully you can see the like general progression of like where the research is going towards, and hopefully inspire you guys to go into the work that produces models. Yeah, and so I'm also open to if you guys have any questions in terms of research, how to get started, and then like what classes to take. If you guys are in like art science, then I can answer some questions in that as well.